The first speaker is going to be the one who gives the case. They're going to be giving the constructive, the thing that we talked about yesterday. Second speaker is going to come up and give the rebuttal. But it's also very important for the first speaker to know what a rebuttal is, because refutation in general is something that is needed throughout the entire debate round. So here's what we're going to do today. So today I'm going to tell you what is a rebuttal, what are the characteristics of a good rebuttal, how to clash, I'll explain what that is, some pointers, and then the guide to icy refutation. How are you going to sum this all up together? So what is rebuttal? A debate rebuttal is a no, you're wrong, and this is why. It's a claim. It's basically saying that any of the claims that the person made in their first speech are debatable, and they're not complete fact. This is also called a refutation. A rebuttal is a speech that directly tells the judge why your opponents are wrong, why you are right, and why you are winning, and why the judge should vote for you. The rebuttal speech is the opportunity for your side to respond to the arguments of the other side that were presented in their case. Thus, the rebuttal speech is not pre-written, unlike a constructive. The constructive and the arguments that we talked about yesterday, those are all pre-written. You write those before a debate round. These you do not write before a round. These what you can do is you can write up some responses of what you think people are going to run, which we'll talk about later, of constructing blocks in a block file. But to an extent, they're also made up on the spot because you don't know exactly what they're going to run. In public forum and in the modified form of debate that we're going to be doing in this camp, the rebuttal is given by the second speaker, and you have 4 minutes to complete the speech. Thus, the rebuttal is the same amount of time as the case speech. So you have the same amount of time to respond to the case as the case actually was. So what are the characteristics of a good rebuttal? 2 things mainly. First, good clarity. Responding to the most important opposing arguments in a line-by-line fashion. What do I mean by this? Remember how we talked about yesterday that you can have on the warrants of the first contention, here are responses. On the impact of the first contention, here are responses, and so on and so forth. You are systematically breaking down and responding to the components of opposing arguments, i.e. you're responding to different pieces of evidence and impacts individually. Now, this is not always the case. Usually you should do line by line in rebuttal type formats. However, other times, if you don't have a line by line sort of response, you can group the entire contention together or multiple contentions together and give an underlying response. And we can talk about that later too. Also, you need to have good tone. A good rebuttal will tell you the overall story of your side. You should be thinking logically about contradictions in the opponent's case and how you can turn their case into about yesterday. You have your ethos, pathos, and logos. Having a good tone and sounding credible means that you are building up your ethos and meaning that the judge is going to respect you and listen to what you have to say. Now, what is clash? In debate, clash is you directly refuting your opponent's case and talking about why they're wrong. Now, we're going to go down some categories of what are some specific types of rebuttals, things that you can do, types of refutation that you can have to directly respond to a person. Now, say that a person comes up with a claim. Say a person has a claim in their case speech. What can you do? What are some different types of responses? First, you can say, first you can have a response on its topicality. You can say it's not topical. This is when you demonstrate that your opponent's argument is irrelevant because it falls outside the scope of what the topic is discussing or tasking debaters with evaluating. So what this means is their case or their argument is talking about ice cream or talking about Skittles when in fact the debate is on H-1B visas. Topicality just basically means it does not relate to it, and they have not established a sufficient link chain and a uniqueness and link chain to show that it does relate. Second, direct. The best way that you can respond to a claim is through directly responding to it. And there are a few ways that you can directly respond to it, which I'll get to. These are direct pieces of evidence that say why your opponents are wrong. In the rebuttal, you can have 2 things. You can have evidence or you can have analytics. Evidence you should get before the round. These are the cards that you're cutting, and these are just stuff that you're compiling. What you do is, because you know the most important arguments in a topic, you can prep out those specific arguments by getting evidence for it, and then you can read those evidence in the round when the time comes. Indirect claims are basically a refutation that kind of refutes the argument, but isn't exactly direct. Here are two of the main indirect sort of things. First is the mitigation. It's a fancy debate word for reduce. And it's basically saying we can mitigate the impact of the contention and say why it is not as important as they say. For example, if they bring up a contention and they say that, we are going to have a recession that's going to impact the entire world. You can mitigate this by saying, it's not going to impact the entire world because of A, B, and C. It's only going to impact just a country. In this case, you're just mitigating the impact of their claim. You're not fully taking it out. You're just making it so it doesn't matter as much in the debate round. Second, you can outweigh. Even if the opponent's argument is true, we have evidence that is more important. We have a different lecture later on of how you weigh and how you do impact calculus, and it's a very fun lesson. So you can stick around for that. But just what you need to know now is weighing and outweighing in itself is basically saying why your impacts or why your claim is more important than the other person's claim. So even if their claim is still true, why is it more important that we achieve our part of our speech? Okay. Part 3. Now, the best thing that you can do, the absolute best thing that you can do is you can turn the argument. Why is their argument a reason to vote for you? There are two types of turns. There's a linked turn and there is an impact turn. A linked turn is basically when you're saying that that when they make a claim, they have their claim, their warrants, and their impact. They're basically saying that the warrant is actually going for you. The warrant is actually our side. I'm trying to think of an example. So remember yesterday, we talked about a case in which we said that H-1B visas and having foreign skilled workers means that we could have foreign skilled workers increases gross domestic capital, which means that we have an economic boost. Now, you can turn this by basically saying, and a link turn would basically say, no, gross human capital, foreign skilled workers do not contribute to gross human capital. Instead, they actually make it worse because of X, Y, and Z. Thus, the impact is actually for our side because you're decreasing the economy because foreign skilled workers don't increase gross human capital. An impact turn is going one step further. Now, it's basically saying that their entire link chain is right, but the impact that they're saying is not a good thing. It's basically saying, why is an economic boost bad? Because their impact on it is an economic boost. Why is that bad? Now, it's kind of hard to do with economic boost because that's necessarily a good, we necessarily think of it as a good thing, but you'll get to other types of impacts where it's kind of debatable. Is that a good thing? Is it not? Evidence challenges. Their evidence, it's basically saying that one piece of evidence is not good because it's either A, it's shady, it's corrupt, or you have to know the author or the methodology of the study that they're citing. And it's basically saying their evidence is shady, thus you prefer our evidence, which directly contradicts theirs. I personally am not a big fan of this because it's only knocking off one piece of evidence on the debates. But say it comes down to only a few pieces of evidence and they have a really strong one that they've just been going through the whole round, then it's good to do an evidence challenge and say, it's too far back. This is a piece of evidence from 2010, when in reality, we're talking about 2020. So it doesn't matter right now. Yeah, one thing that I forgot to add on is a D-link. A D-link is basically saying that just this is not true. It's just defense. It's it's just saying that it's not true. Like you're saying that foreign skilled workers are going to increase human capital, which means that they're going to have an economic boom in America. A D-link is basically saying that no, foreign skilled workers are not going to increase gross human capital for X, Y, and Z. Now, look at the difference between a turn and a D-link. These are the two most important types of responses that you're going to give. One is defense. A D-link is defense. A turn is offense. You basically you can think of it as a basketball analogy. And if you're just doing defense, you're making sure that they're not scoring. If you're doing offense, then you're taking the ball from them and you're going to score a shot for it. You're going to score a shot on the other side of the field. So in debate, it's always better to have offense because it gives you more points for you, but doing defense is also good. But all it does still is just taking away points from them instead of making those points for yourself. So it's always better and it's more preferred to do turns over D-links. Okay, a few pointers. Always point out why your opponents are wrong. you still have to do it no matter what. Like, even if you still don't know what's the best way to respond to a contention, just think of it logically. Think of a contention logically and try to attack it directly. Don't sidestep it. Remember, indirect refutation is not as good, and it won't be as good as direct refutation, because you're still not directly responding to it. Even if you don't know exactly what to respond to it and you haven't prepped out this argument, all you have to do is think logically, and I'm sure an answer will come up to you. Also, sound credible. Remember, perceptual dominance. You want to establish that ethos in the round that makes it seem like you know what you're talking about. Establish authority and take control of the round. Take control of the round for yourself and show that you are winning. Okay. Now, the guide to icy refutation. How are you going to make your rebuttal speech very well, very good? And how are you going to incorporate all these technical terms into an actual well thought out rebuttal? Now, refutation steps. First, you want to signpost. You want to identify which of your opponent's arguments you're responding to. Signposting basically means you're saying which argument you're responding to. So you're basically saying, on their first contention, these are our responses. You're identifying where you are on their case, so then the judge knows where you're responding to, and it's easier for them to keep track of. Then, second, you want to state your counterclaim. Share evidence or reasoning why your opponent's arguments are faulty. This is where you actually use those technical stuff where we were just talking about, the D-link and the term. This is your counterclaim. You want to state your counterclaim. Then you want to support your claim. Give your evidence, your examples, and you're citing your statistics. And then lastly, you want to state why your evidence is superior. This is where you're kind of doing some weighing. You're doing some comparative analysis. You want to say because it's more recent, more qualified, it has better logic, or has a bigger impact. If you look at this is not too different than any argument writing that you're giving. All you're doing is you're stating your counterclaim, you're giving your evidence, and then you're giving your impact. It's exactly the same format as cases that we were talking about yesterday, but it's just in a rebuttal style format. Yeah. And the thing that's the only main difference from what we were talking about yesterday is that you want to do a little bit of comparative analysis. Why is your claim superior, and why does it make more sense than the opponent's claim? We're going to talk about more about weighing later on in the week, but just remember that you still want to always do comparative analysis on why your counterclaim or why your claim is better than the opponent's. Things that you shouldn't do, things that that refutation don'ts. Don't just summarily reject the argument. Don't just say that, no, don't accept their argument, here's our claim, and just don't give any evidence. You got to substantiate your answers. You have to put in evidence, give your examples, give your citing. Even if you don't have examples and it's just all analytics, give the logic for it. Explain the logic, explain the warranting. Don't just say, oh, this isn't going to happen because I said so. You have to say, why is the reason? Also, don't ask a question, not even if it's rhetorical, because this doesn't generate offense. So like, if you're saying like, oh, but why would the United States ever want to do this? I mean, like, that's not really generating offense. You could probably, like, the opponent could come up and give several reasons why they might want to complete this plan, and it's not really doing anything for you. Also, don't forget to number arguments. Remember, you want to signpost. You want to say where you are in the round, and you want to say how many responses you have. First, you want to say, on contention 1, we have 3 responses. First, da-da-da. Second, da-da-da. And third, da-da-da. For all these reasons, you cannot vote for their contention 1. And if you put on a term, and actually it turns over for our side. Next, on to their second contention. You see, it's just easier for the judge to see what's going on in the round. Also, don't just use a mere contradiction. Don't use weird analytics. Only use contradiction if it's a double bind. A double bind is so a contradiction is basically when a person uses 2 parts of their case that when they're at 2 parts of their case, they're saying stuff that directly contradicts against each other. So if they're saying that like increasing foreign skilled workers through H-1B visas increases the overall economy and makes it increases the overall economy in one contention, but in their other contention, they're saying, you know, they don't really do that much for the economy, and that's fine because they can help us out of a recession. that's a contradiction in itself because they're saying two different things. You can point that out, and it's a good idea to point that out, but don't use that as your only response to both contentions. When you're pointing out that there's a contradiction, that's what's called a double bind, because they're binding themselves together with two contradicting pieces of evidence. Okay. How to riot. In your rebuttal, you want to riot. What I mean by riot, you want to reduce, indict, outweigh, and turn. These are what we talked about earlier. It's just summing it down into the main points. Okay. First, reduce. You want to mitigate or reduce the size of your opponent's benefits or harms. We talked about this. It's only taking it down a little bit. You want to indict your evidence. You want to indict evidence by either indicting the methodology. Methodology just means how a study was conducted, the source, who is conducting the study, or counter evidence. We have better evidence because X, Y, and Z. Or you can indict logic by saying that where's the warrant to it? You didn't explain it. Or B, that's a fallacy. Because remember, if you want to go more in depth on fallacies, then feel free to, because it's actually really interesting. We might talk about logical fallacies more, but I talked about one yesterday, ad hominem, which basically means that's a response to the debater instead of the actual debate argument. So like saying, I don't like the color of your shoes, rather than actually responding to the debate argument. So you want to indict logic if it's a fallacy. Third, you want to outweigh. You got to get, sometimes it's actually better to outweigh than give a response, because sometimes it gives you strategic concessions. And and it's basically saying, even if all of their arguments are true, all our harms and or benefits outweigh. And our harms and benefits are mutually exclusive. Lastly, most importantly, you gotta turn. It's very, very important for you. It's either saying their harms are benefits, and so that's why it's good for you, or their benefits are harms, and that's why it's bad for them. You can't vote for them. Now, just remember, this is a great way to remember the types of responses you're going to give in your round. We went over the technical part of it. Here's how you memorize it. If you're in a debate round, if you're in a rebuttal, you don't know what to do, just remember, you got to riot. You got to riot against you got to riot against the opponent, and you got to riot against the judge. Now, if you were actually going to look at it through the okay, I don't know what happened to the title, but if you're actually going to look at it through the best way to riot, your riot strategy should first prefer turning, then reducing, indicting if applicable, then lastly outweighing. In that order, it's trio. I'm going to say that again. Turning, reducing, indicting if applicable, then outweighing. In that order, it's trio, because this is what you should prefer most. I say that you should still outweigh if possible. You should always do some weighing. Keep it at the end though, and indicting only if it's applicable. But yeah, remember, this is primarily for the rebuttal speech, but all these technical sort of terms are stuff that you're going to have to do as both a first speaker and a second speaker, because they happen in each type of debate speech, except for probably the constructive speech. Remember, you always want to riot. This is just how you're going to remember it, and it's the best way that you can make your points come across, give your counterclaim, and make sure that you are winning the round at the end of the day. So that's my lecture. If